Hello and welcome to the Servant Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam Shinta and I'm joined by Rick Kite. Each episode we talk with leaders in a variety of fields about character, the common good, and the importance of civic virtue. Hi Rick, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good, Sam. Good to be here.
Yes, good to be here with you as always. Sounds like you're having a very long day today, but happy to see a beautiful painting there behind you.
Yeah, that's brook trout. And, the trout season ends in about a week. And I've had another week not on the stream, so that's too bad.
Well, hopefully you can correct that for the next week here coming up. Well, we're joined today by Lieutenant Colonel Erik Archer. Lieutenant Colonel Archer spent 20 years in the Army as a military police officer. He deployed twice to Iraq and twice to Afghanistan. He led platoon and company level formations while serving as the operations officer and executive officer for the most decorated MP battalion in the Army, the 716th MP Battalion. His experience has been diverse. He served as a platoon leader and company commander, but also as the chief of police for Fort Carson and the officer in charge of a forensics lab in Helmand Province in Afghanistan. Before becoming the director of the Military Science Department at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, Viterbo University, and Winona State University, he served on the Joint Staff at the Pentagon in the National Military Command Center, where he briefed senior military and civilian leaders and also developed national-level operational plans. Colonel Archer uses his role as a tribal elder in the Army to teach the next generation of Army leaders. He is married to his college sweetheart, and together they have 3 vibrant kiddos. He will retire this coming fall and will start life phase 2. Welcome, Lieutenant Colonel Erik Archer. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Rick, for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're really happy to have you on the podcast today. Erik, you shared this line with me in this email at one point. I thought this was a wonderful way to enter into our conversation, where you were talking about the role of the military in our country and how people perceive the military. And you wrote at the end of this email, you wrote, "I am Erik, first Erik, then a son, husband, and father, then an American, and then a soldier." So you kind of inverted the order of the way I think oftentimes we think of people in uniform as you're wearing today. Talk a little bit about that and how you see your role in the community and how you prioritize your various roles.
Well, thanks, Sam. I guess I got to first say in the bio that whenever I speak of my vibrant children, that's kind of code word for troublesome and energetic. So that's maybe the polite way to say that. They're amazing. So I think that identity in probably any profession where you give much of yourself is something that we can struggle with. And I know people that have lost themselves in service to their nation. Admirable service demands a lot, and in some cases everything. But I think striking that balance of who you are and what you give is critical to being healthy inside and outside of the military. And to folks not in the military, often what they see is the uniform and then just soldier. And I think sometimes that's a disservice to the diversity of opinion, thought, and experience that we have in the Army. I know that we all look the same with this, but I am Erik. I grew up in North Dakota. My grandma speaks like she's from the movie Fargo on Lesta. My middle name is Sven. And the totality of experiences bring me to who I am today. And when I hang up the uniform, I will be very proud of that service. But then absolutely, I have children who I owe much to, a wife who I owe much to, and then myself and my next phase of life. So I've just seen oftentimes where we build castles and they are in the sand and we don't know it. Our profession, we're all very easily replaceable is something we kind of talk about in the Army a lot. So we'll build this castle and think that it's our legacy, but inevitably the tide of change comes in, washes that away, and the next person builds something even better, or maybe not, but it washes it away. In my experience, one of the lessons I've learned in the Army is the real castles of stone are built in our family and in those that follow us. That's the legacy. So one of the things in that statement I'm hinting at is that, I want my legacy to be not Erik was a soldier, but, Erik was a good man. He was a good father and he was a good husband. And then he has people who he influenced to become hopefully the best versions of themselves. And for me, that's kind of how I prioritize things in my life.
That's wonderful. And you have this other line. Yeah, I mean, your bio is just wonderful because it has a lot of cheeky turns of phrase in there. But your reference to being a tribal elder, right, teaching the next generation of young people. And so, how do you convey this message to those who are coming through the military science programs at the various universities that you work with, and are maybe coming into it with this monolithic view of what military service is about or where it stands within our society?
And that's the challenge, isn't it, Sam? Like, so you have all this knowledge and you wish you could just like plug the USB drive, into the ear and then it just download, right? Because you've learned much of that through experience, but you're also cognizant of that much of your experiences and knowledge are seen through the lens of your own eyes. So you allow for a lot of deviation. I'll tell you, I have all these classes I teach the students. I teach ethics. I teach the law of land warfare. We'll talk about My Lai and big, deep, topics. But the class that they enjoy the most every year is one where I talk about marriage in the military. And I talk about, struggles that I've had because of balances I've made and poor choices I've made in terms of, how much do I give to what area of my life? And I'll talk that a lot of folks really struggle with that. And I'm really candid in that class. And every year the students come back and say they appreciate that level of candor and frankness the most. So what I've learned in my couple of years of teaching is that the best way for me to impart those lessons is to be open and forthright with where I've made mistakes and then where I've succeeded and why. And they really want to learn from experience more than they want to learn from books. And that probably sounds, I guess, obvious, right? But the way I've found to impart that is to share my experiences. And really, that's why the Army has me here as a tribal elder. And I feel elder more days than tribal. But I've walked that path so I can tell them I've done this. And this is how it worked for me. And then they can overlay their understanding and then hopefully pull from that some lessons.
And I was listening to another podcast last week, and they had a former member of I think it was the Air Force. It was either Air Force or Marines. They had both, but one of them had made the observation too, and I think it was particularly aimed toward talking to young people that in terms of the monolith of the military, we often think that everyone joins for the same reason. And that's part of that diversity as well, right? That people have different motivations for joining or giving their service to the military. Do you recognize that or see that with the young people that you're dealing with?
Yeah, Sam, I'll tell you, like the Army asks, I tell people the Army asks a lot, but it gives a lot. And one of the things it's given all of us is that there's such a rich diversity of experience. My last job at the Pentagon, I was getting looked at for whatever at the clinic, and I was talking to the young soldier that was working on me. And I just asked him where he's from, and he's from Chicago. And I asked him why he joined the Army. He said, well, he joined the Army because it was safer than his civilian life. And, that's kind of an interesting comment. I asked him to tell me more. And he grew up in a really, really rough side of Chicago. Most weeks he would have bullets, like lodged into the side of his house. So for him, the Army was an escape from violence. It was an escape to security, right? And he was working on his bachelor's degree and already had a scholarship lined up for his master's degree with the ultimate goal of being a doctor in the Army. We like to think, I think sometimes of young folks, and I think maybe since the dawn of time, older generations have mischaracterized younger generations. There's not some monolithic group of younger folks either, right? Like millennials, they are, in my experience, supremely talented, supremely motivated, and everyone does have a different why. I think if we try to put the stamp of one why on a group of people, we'll miss out on a whole bunch of talent. And really, one of the great things about going to the field when we're out training is you get a chance to really engage with people on authentic levels. And the reasons why people join the military are absolutely, I guess, heartwarming might be the right word. There's a huge diversity.
So you've got this diversity of motivations, but do you find generally that there is some sense of duty that is shared by everybody that is engaging, or is that something that has to be developed in some?
Man, it's a great question. So, I mean, duty to what, right? So there's duty that we feel, we swear an oath as officers to the Constitution. And that's something I like to, make sure when I have engagements that I emphasize. It's not to a president, it's not to a political party, it's to a constitution. So my duty is to the Constitution. It's an Army value, duty. So we have duty. But in my conversations with the seniors, I'll ask them duty to what? To your soldiers, to your oath to the Constitution. What if they're in conflict? To which duty do you prioritize and elevate the other? What about your duty to your family? And what if that conflicts with your duty to the Army? So duty itself, yes, there's absolutely duty. I will tell you that in my experience, it's most powerfully expressed in my duty to my fellow soldier. And, movies make much of that. But when you deploy overseas, when you're in harm's way, even when you're on the obstacle course at Fort McCoy, you have the flag on your shoulder, but your duty is most immediately towards the person to your left and to your right, because you care about them as a teammate. And I think to anybody that's been on a team, they can empathize with that. The nation, my oath, the Constitution, but immediately the people within my ability to touch, or the people whom I have a duty to be like my best for. And that's why we study. That's why we become so physically fit. And we have a duty to be the best versions of ourselves for our team, so we don't let them down. And then I think maybe that's how duty is most precisely expressed at the unit level, is my duty to be value added to my team.
Yeah, and it seems not to get too overtly political, but it seems like this whole question of duty has been in the spotlight over the past couple of weeks, particularly with the center of the focus on General Milley and what he may or may not have done, and whether it was within the scope of his responsibility. Should he have stepped down if he didn't like certain orders or not? And I thought that he actually at the end spoke very eloquently of that responsibility and duty. So it never goes away, right? It's always there, and it's how does this then connect with you talk about hanging up the uniform a little bit later this year to the bigger duty to the community and what you do beyond the service that you've already provided?
So I think that the duty, I share then the duty that we all do, I think, and that's to be the best citizen and neighbor that we can be. So for me, that's expressed right now by wearing this uniform, right? And when I joined, I didn't necessarily join for that reason. I played football in high school. I was 140 pounds. I played inside linebacker. I just got my clock cleaned for 2 years. So then I knew I would never play at the collegiate level. I called up the ROTC department and said, "Hey, is the Army like this team?" They said, "Absolutely." And I've never looked back. I never intended to do 20 years. I've been playing football for 20. I've had a great team. So for me, back to that, I'm Eric. I don't think my duty to be the best neighbor and citizen I can be is any different in or out of uniform. It'll just probably be less dangerous. I think I would hope to contribute as much or more for phase 2 of life than I am right now. And I think every soldier is probably charged with that, to take the leadership skills they've been given, the ability to manage chaotic, environments, and then take that and improve wherever you go next. We have a saying in the Army that we're always improving our fighting position. The longer you're there, you just make it better and better, more fortified. I think that applies to much of life. Wherever we go, we want to try to improve the situation.
Where did you get your insights on leadership? Was it people that you've met along the way and served with, or is it events that you've been part of, or you've learned from your own experiences, successes and failures? How have you learned about leadership in your career?
Rick, the Army has a lot of doctrine that teaches the foundations of leadership. We could talk about domains in that, we learn in the operational environment where we are in our units. We learn in the institutional domain where we're at school. We have a self-development domain. We could talk about, the competencies and attributes of a leader. A leader should be have presence, intellect, and care. Be a leader of presence, character, and intellect that leads, develops, and achieves. And I believe in all those things. That's helped inform my perspective about leadership. We have a manual there, a thick one on Army leadership. But I think, like I was mentioning earlier with the cadets, much of it comes from learning. I was brand new lieutenant in Germany, and my soldiers, we provided law enforcement in a community about 60 miles away because the unit deployed. So, we were working 12-hour shifts, and my guys would have to, get up 3 hours before that shift to get prepared, drive, to do guard mounts, where we check to make sure everything's right, and then go on shift, only to drive 3 hours back. So that 12-hour day really was, an 18 or 19-hour day. I knew that couldn't be right, but I also knew that I'm a lieutenant. There's people that know better. So I never said anything. And then my guys were just driven into the ground, because of that. So one of the things when I talk to my students is my biggest regret in the Army came very early, and that was not trusting my gut, not trusting my instinct, and standing up for my people. So most of my understanding of leadership has come from experience, but then also the amazing example of people I've worked for. I think we can't state enough about providing an example of leadership, right? Like the first guy I ever worked for and the first team I ever worked for was amazing. So really all I've ever tried to do is recreate that environment that I had with the 709th and P Battalion in Germany. And I think we as leaders have that responsibility to create for young leaders, because they imprint, right? Like the first leadership experience you go into is one that really sticks. So that's almost just paramount that we get that right for our young leaders. I benefited from fantastic leaders my whole life, and being on great teams. I'm on one now, and I've really been on one the whole way. They've kind of carried me along.
I find that really interesting. One of the things I've done when I've taught graduate students in our MBA program is ask them in the first class if they think that businesses are ethical or unethical. And the class tends to split 50-50 most years. And it turns out then with further questioning that it really depends a lot on their first work experience.
Yeah.
If they had an ethical leader in their first work experience, they tend to think businesses are ethical. Otherwise they don't. And so those early leaders we serve under are really profoundly significant, aren't they, to our own conception?
Yeah, there's something there, Rick. I wish we could have people better understand that. Like, to me, that duckling thing is like, I will see kids go to a unit and they will imprint, and they believe that's the Army, or that's that's business, or this is Viterbo, or this is the community, because of one experience. And you just wish we could get that home run every time, because I think things would be generally different if we did. It really, really does stick with them.
You reminded me also, just listening to you, one of the criticisms we get in teaching servant leadership at Viterbo is, well, that's the soft stuff. And then people are really surprised when, first of all, I remind them that there are two organizations that were the first to adopt Greenleaf's book, The Servant as Leaders, and that was an order of Franciscan Sisters and the US Marines. And like, people are kind of surprised by that. And then secondly, like how many people we've had from the military or ex-military that have come through our program. And I think it's because it is such an introspective model of leadership. That is, if you're going to be a servant leader, you have to really work on yourself first. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful. And that's what I'm hearing in your answers today.
Well, thanks, Rick. Like, the soft stuff, my first thought was, well, what's the hard stuff then? And the leadership doesn't have to have an edge. Like, there's times in crisis where, we'll be abrupt and we're going to be succinct, but leadership doesn't have to have an edge. Like, and I guess what, in the military, we talk often about the privilege of command, and it can be taken from me like that, because it is a supreme privilege, ultra competitive, like to have influence over that many people, it needs to be the right guy or gal there. I think if you don't appreciate that as an opportunity to serve, you shouldn't be in that spot to begin with. And I think the most, meat-eating tough folks in the world would tell you that exact same thing. There's no prize for grinding people into dust or being difficult. The whole goal is to make them believe in you, that you want the best for them. And then if you do that, you can do anything. I mean, if you have that on your team.
You also said, you started out talking about how we like to build castles, but then we become really attached. I think our ego is attached to what we've built, and we want to see it sustained and carried on by others. And you seem to have kind of, I guess, am I hearing you right? You've reconciled yourself to thinking, well, like what you've done may not have any lasting, I'd have lasting significance in people you've influenced, but not in kind of structures or other things that are more permanent. Is that right?
So, there's an article I give to my seniors. I'm going to mess up the title, but it talks about not being like a water pitcher leader. Someone that puts their hand in the water, thrashes it around so the water splashes, but when you pull it out, the water returns exactly the way that it was. And I certainly don't mean to say that, but I think a lot of us like you mentioned ego, Rick. I think a lot of us attach our worth and value to like productivity products and things, and maybe how we perceive them and want them to be, whereas someone could come in after us and do it better or different. And that's not injurious to us. That's a good thing. So I guess for me, it's not that I've made peace with, I want to sound like not making a difference. I served as an officiant for 2 of my cadets' weddings, like that. So to me, when I'm on the porch with a rocker, that I influenced them enough that they wanted me to officiate their wedding, that is where I've made a difference in the military. when I get a letter from a guy that's saying they're doing great things in the Army and they're appreciative for what little difference I was able to make for them, that matters. That I turned over the team well matters, but it won't ever be a structure, a system, or a thing, because those are imminently changeable. They erode over time. I think people is where our legacy rests, not things or positions. And I guess maybe that's kind of what I meant to say. And this job is a great job for a military person, because my last job at the National Military Command Center, I worked in the basement, no windows, 3 years, and it was a hard go. It was a hard job. This allows one to transition a little bit into the civilian world and kind of make peace with, I did my very best, and my very best made a difference, but it doesn't define me, and I have more challenges in front of me.
It almost what you're getting at here is stewardship, right? That you see this, that your role has been as a good steward of this process. All right, that you've touched people, you've influenced people, you've left the institution in as good a shape, if not slightly better than when you joined it, right? But you know that that's going to be outside of your control, but you've had the influence where you could, and that's and you've not made it worse, for sure, which is good.
Sam, that's a good point. Stewardship, that's we owe that stewardship of the profession, and stewardship has a painful side to it as well. Like we owe, we must protect the profession from those that would maybe harm it or injure it. So throughout my career and every leader's career, there's times where we have to make decisions about who gets to be in the profession and who doesn't. And really, a big part of leadership I don't know if we talk about enough is how to identify bad apples, and then how to ideally recover the person and keep them on the team. But if not, how to separate them. That's a very difficult conversation sometimes, because tolerating bad apples, lowers standards, diminishes confidence in the leadership. But then you'll find leaders that treat failure as a tattoo that you can never overcome. And really, it's just a stain that's washable, right? So if we can get through that and have the person recover, usually they're far better off than they were in the beginning. So the challenge, I think, for a lot of leaders is being precise with failure, because leaders can absolutely mess things up. And I've done that quite a bit. But stewarding the profession, I think, to a large degree involves protecting the profession. And that means having hard conversations, something we're not all good at, and then being very surgical with how we apply discipline.
I want to ask you a question on a little bit different tack, because you've been working with the refugees at Fort McCoy, and also you mentioned that you teach military ethics. And one of the things, it strikes me, and I'm just curious, getting your observations on this. It strikes me that we have a real hard time as American society understanding the military's role and objectives in foreign countries, because our political language is very consequentialist. We really understand any kind of objective as being justified in terms of some kind of cost-benefit analysis, and by some kind of end result. What is the cost of something, and then what is the end result that has to be justified by that cost. And it seems to me that in many countries, especially those that are more tribal in nature, don't think about ethics in terms of a cost-benefit analysis. Their language is much more character-driven. That is, it's focused in issues of loyalty, relationships, honor, shame. Like this is in cost-benefit only take place like within a kind of overall structure of the relationships that come prior. And so there seems to be a profound disconnect with the way in which, like, the military actually dealing on the ground in a country like Afghanistan is carrying out its operations, and in which we end up talking about it as a citizenry, and politicians talk about war and its objectives. So I'm just, that's a lot right there. I'm just asking you to reflect on that. Does that make sense, this problem of communication?
Yeah, I think a lot of us that have served in Afghanistan have done a lot of reflecting in the past couple of months. So, I mean, to the first point, I think about like national level strategy commitments. I try to always foot stomp the power everyone you mentioned as a citizenry. Like, we go where we're told. Good, right, wrong, bad. Like, the people that influence that are the folks that vote. So I think an informed and active citizenry is the best antidote for any ills that we see at the governmental level, without a doubt. It is an odd contradiction, isn't it, to have uprooted like we did and then to now be supporting as we are. Supporting as we are now, I will tell you, feels natural, right, and healing, at least to me. I'm just one guy. You mentioned values of loyalty, relationships, and honor. You're right. Like, I think countries that are tribal in nature feel those things because that's tied to worth, right? Like, and that goes back to when we had to survive together. Could I count on you to help me survive, or could I not? And if I can't, you're not going to be in this tribe, right? So I think for a lot of us military folks, like, there's deep friendships with the Afghans we work with. I mean, bonds forged in danger are really powerful bonds. So to uproot and depart, like, violates, loyalty, relationship, honor. It runs, like fingers on a chalkboard against the grain of who we are, and especially for the people that we're leaving. So it is honestly therapeutic for many of us to see, these, like, just their kids and families at Fort McCoy. It's so thankful we were able to make a positive difference in their life. The conversation that's negative towards them boggles my mind, and I think it would largely, if I were to paint with a wide brush, comes from people that never stepped foot in Afghanistan or are not informed as to the nature of their struggles. There's a word I think Desmond Tutu talks about, Ubuntu. I am because we are, right? Our interconnectedness as humans. I have that with Afghans. I've been there, and just as like a visitor, right? Like, my worst day in Afghanistan was the best for any one of them. I've seen what they go through every day, and I wish them not one more second of pain or ill. And if I can do anything to help make their life better, I'm all for it. And I think every soldier at Fort McCoy has that same feeling. And honestly, Rick, the professionals there, states there, the military, Major General Guthrie and the team there, they're doing such phenomenal, fantastic work to make this feel like a community, a neighborhood, and a team, so we can get these folks on to their next best life.
I was there at the fort. I think it was in week 2. It was only about 10 days after a lot of the refugees had arrived. So everybody was still trying to figure everything out, getting the meals sorted out, which is, I think, just a logistical miracle, practically, given 14,000 meals a day or something, that you had to get together so quickly. And I know that's really problematic, and there's all kinds of cultural differences in how we expect them how we expect to distribute meals and how they handle that sort of, so even things simple like that are really problematic. But you've had some time now to kind of get a lot of that figured out, logistical stuff, so forth. What do you see as the kind of more long-term picture here? Do you, because here's what I'm trying to get at. What I saw is, people that, they were still new. It was only like 10 days, but they were already really bored. And I was trying to think, like, how could I imagine being in a country with, like, no access to any of the things that I take for granted, none of the, activities and everything, and being there for 6 months in that kind of camp. And I know this is, probably true of refugees camps around the world, but what are the next steps to really get people engaged in our society and make that transition?
Yeah, so great questions, and I'll speak to it as Erik. Not necessarily a soldier, not involved with Fort McCoy. Just I'll speak as Erik. I do know that the effort there to help be culturally sensitive and aware of what these folks are going through is immense, and led by experts in that. The State Department is very, very good at that. I was there this weekend, and like, there's women and there's community centers rather that have all sorts of arts and crafts for the kiddos. There are athletic events for the kiddos, and then there's a sewing center for the women. Of course, it's not home, right? It's not going to be. The food is now much better than it was, and that's not even a bad thing. It's just any of us that have had managed a situation in crisis. Like day one is a lot of that. And then day 180 is much better. So as long as you're on glide path towards normalcy, and the way that it is now is absolutely incredible. Everybody wants them to find, home. And what I've seen from the community and the government is really an outpouring of support for that. And the great news is it overlaps, right? If we have that Venn diagram, like the military is providing the housing and the space, State Department is providing a whole wealth of expertise. Then there's a bunch of NGOs providing a whole ton of expertise. Catholic Charities is on ground. So together, that overlapping Venn diagram is all surging towards taking these people who've experienced trauma. I mean, that's the other thing with refugees. And these in particular, it's a traumatic experience. There's a really powerful poem called Home by Warson Shire, if you have a chance to read that. But it talks about the trauma of being a refugee. So everyone here is just working extremely hard to help them process, recover, and then move forward. I think you're right, Rick. I think it's probably pretty boring. But I think in that monotony is security, and then on the horizon is their next life. And there was a really good interview, I think yesterday, with an Afghan on Fort McCoy who said exactly that. This is not exciting, but I know that this is the best place for me and my family, and we look forward to the next thing. And I think that's probably exactly what we want. Any excitement right now is probably not a good thing. Boring is probably just right.
Erik, before, and maybe this brings things full circle, you mentioned the idea of people being critical who'd maybe not set foot in Afghanistan, really don't understand the situation, the whole idea of an engaged and informed citizenry. What about our leaders? And what do you think they sometimes get wrong about the military, or maybe misunderstand about the military and its role in society? Or do they not get it wrong?
Sam, so a lot of senior military leaders have been historically apolitical to the point where they don't even vote in presidential elections. And I have taken that tack myself. I rarely, as someone who wears a uniform, look up and scrutinize. I talk to my seniors a lot. Like I see so often, person X will be upset about, their team. I'll have a platoon leader that will, when I was a battalion executive officer, platoon leaders would complain about their company or the battalion. It wasn't doing this, and why shouldn't it be doing this? And it owes people this. And I asked them, well, who's looking out for your soldiers, right? So what I try to work on, and one of my things is from me down, right? So from me down, it's going to be right. So I feel largely blessed for the civilian leaders that we've had while I've been in the military. Widely different ideological standpoints and how we've been utilized and towards what objectives. But I think this is the best Army in the world, and I'm very thankful for the civilian leadership throughout that. I worked in the Pentagon. I briefed congressional staffers, and I briefed senior military leaders, and every one of them had a genuine drive to do the right thing. Do we always get it right? No, absolutely not. But they all had a genuine drive to do that. I would say, as a citizenry, what we misunderstand about the military sometimes, and we touched on at the beginning, is glamorizing the military or deifying the military. Like, we are, we are not plaster saints. We are cut from the same cloth as the rest of our nation. And too much of that puts us on a pedestal that makes us unrelatable. And really, the best thing that we can do, I think, as citizenry and soldiers is have that proverbial beer at a bar and talk. And it's, what is it that you do? And what is it that you do? And then we get to know each other. Sometimes I fear us becoming so far removed that we are a separate entity. And when we go to war, there's no sacrifice felt, because it is the army of whom we know no one. It is the mission of what we know not much about. That's what worries me. And the press, I think, sometimes can be accidentally complicit in not telling the story of why we're fighting and who's fighting. And if you don't know why we're fighting, it can go on forever. So I think that's where I would emphasize a disconnect sometimes is if we go to war, like let's do that as a country, an informed country and an invested country. So we spend soldier blood, intelligently, wisely, and prudently.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that very much. I was not certainly not trying to put you on the spot, and I think you actually ended up exactly where I hoped you would in that response. Finally, you talked a little bit earlier about what you see with these young people. So you have a pretty good sense of optimism that our military is going to be in good hands as you transition out.
Yeah, they're so good, Sam. The military right now, our leadership philosophy is called mission command. And that's as old as at least Grant telling Sherman to, destroy everything in the South. You figure out how best to do that, right? I think Grant said, let's see, I do not propose to lay down for you a plan of campaign, but simply to lay down the work it is desirable to have done and leave you free to execute it in your own way. So that's Grant to Sherman. And we know now that the operating environment is fast, it's complex, it's chaotic. So the leadership philosophy we have now is to give the leader as much as they need, no more, and let them do great things. So to do that, there has to be trust, there has to be competence, there has to be all sorts of things. But we now give, junior leaders a ton of responsibility. And if we're doing it right, a ton of latitude to make decisions. We underwrite those decisions when they don't go well, if it was, planned well. And that, I think, creates leaders of great ability and capability. And I see these guys and gals every day just absolutely crushing it. I have immense faith in them. And I think we as elders would do well to do away with some of those stereotypes that we have, because these guys are, I think, better than we ever were. And I can't wait to see them, lead formations.
Well, that is just wonderful to hear, and I think you get a lot of credit for that in the work that you've done. So I want to thank you very much for joining us today, Lieutenant Colonel Erik Archer. Thank you so much for everything that you've done, and I know everything that you're going to continue to do in our community. Your continued service, I'm sure, will be something honorable as what you've done thus far. So thank you so much.
Well, I thank you both. I think the service you provide is incredible, and I appreciate the book recommendations. I have Bowling Alone arrived the other day, and 2 books from Yoko Ogawa. So thank you for book recommendations.
We're so happy that you listened to that.
I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much.